What does it mean when people say that we're all one? You know, it doesn't mean that we're all spiritually one. It doesn't mean that we're all the same identity. Certainly not. What does that mean that we're all one? Let me give you my view. And, you know, saying, oh, the spirit is all one, or that, you know, everything is one, and it doesn't really tell us much, and it doesn't help solve our condition either of not experiencing ourselves as one. I'll tell you what I think that it means when we say that we're all one. If you really think about it, it's really fucking incredible that here we have 8 billion people and the parameters of our experience is so similar. You know, you take just a tiny little fraction of a percent of the DNA and change it from human to something else, and it becomes wildly different type of experience. You know, you have different ways of sensing information from the environment, different types of vision. You see different light wavelengths, different heightened sense of smell. You know, some animals have cold blood, some have warm blood. But amongst us, among people, the parameters of our experience, let's call it the dimensionality, is so fantastically the same. Isn't it just freaking incredible? Isn't it a miracle that we can even communicate with one another, that we can even have the same type of experience enough that, you know, we can be in the same room with one another and both have the same experience, you know, from amidst all of the chaos of the universe, especially, you know, this kind of common misconception that we have that matter just kind of randomly jumbled around, and then random things had random outcomes, and then we get this world. If it really is all randomness, then it's a miracle that all of us, our sensory experience, our intellection, our emotional experience. Now, I'm not going to get into the, you know, divisions between genders and ethnicities and things like that. Let's just focus on the main parameters of human experience are so similar that it's not jumbled together. You know, you and I, when we're in the same room, we see the same things, we hear the same things, we can communicate our inner experience to one another. Isn't that just amazing? Think of how awful the world would be if a sentient being was completely isolated and didn't have the same parameters of sensory experience and intelligence and language, and just absolutely was isolated and completely unable to communicate with anyone else, to share your experience. It would be deadening, it would be torturous, it would be hellacious. So if you look at your inner experience, the way that your psyche is organized, the way that your body is organized, it's literally the same as every other human being. Your sense of identity that you insist is apart from everyone else, it really isn't. It's a delusional. It's a delusion in your head to think that your identity is individual. And of course, I'm on my soapbox about the core tenet of Buddhism, which is dependent origination, and I'll never shut up about that, because that's really the ultimate realization of enlightenment, is the dependent origination of phenomena, emptiness. From the moment that you're born and you start imbibing sensory information from your family, from the immediate people around you, from your society, who all in turn imbibe sensory information from their surrounding, and the people who are near to you, as soon as you start growing up, they influence. It's like a shared experience, it's like one experience. And over time, we mix with different people, and we have different adventures, and it gives us a trajectory which seems to be unique and seems to be individual. But really, it's bound up with all of the people who have been close relations with us, all those people who have influenced us, who have exchanged, data, emotional validation, invalidation of what's right and wrong, and ethics and understanding. And we look at one another and we say, yes, this is this, and this is not that. All of those things are coursing through us, especially now with the advent of social media, with memes and things like that. A meme is a symbol which is a deep unconscious connection between two people. You look at that same symbol and you get it and you relate to it, and you send it to your friend and you say, hey, this is us, right? Because we have such an interwoven inner experience, because our consciousness is flowing in and out of one another. When you're sitting next to somebody in the same room and you look at them, right? Of course, your mind kind of sees the differences in the forms and it imputes this separateness. But really, especially when those boundaries dissolve a little bit, like you get drunk, right? Or you fall in love, right? That inner experience becomes one, and that's what we all crave, of course, right? We crave that connectivity and that dissolution of boundaries with people who are close to our hearts. Because fundamentally, we're all one. Fundamentally, when you're in a room with somebody, the light bouncing off of his form or her form, reflecting into your cornea, that image of that person next to you is interpenetrating your being, and you're filled with observations about that person. Your intellect is analyzing all of the little minutiae and the body language. That person is inside of you. They're inside of your mind. And likewise, for the light and the information coming off of your form flows into the other person. You're sitting next to that person. You're inside of one another's minds. Your sensory information, your sense consciousness, the elements of your body, the whole parameters of your experience are one. And you're, inside of one another's consciousness. And like I said, of course, as you've flown through time and woven and had your own experiences, there are things which are not like you, and there are things that are like you. But really, it's just an energetic movement. Identity is not solid. It could not be that we were separate and solid. Otherwise, there would be no way for me to identify with another person. When I see them say or do something and I say, that's like me. Your identity is not static like that. You know, for the sake of kind of quantifying all of these experiences, you know, impute a label over yourself, but that label is always changing. And that's the primary realization of Buddhism. You know, Nisargadatta Maharaj, one of the most world famous Advaita Vedanta yogis and gurus. Advaita, you know, the monistic kind of oneness, which denies any division whatsoever and imputes like you know, the all is the Atman or the Brahman. Even towards the end of his life, he became kind of a Buddhist, and he said, you know, even beyond the realization of the self is the realization of the not self, which is that barrier which is constantly mutable, right? Like I said, your identity changes from time to time and experience to experience. It changes relative to people. You see somebody who's a mimetic leader. You see a leader and you can't help but taking on their qualities. You spend a lot of time with somebody, especially somebody you're in love with. You can't help but taking on their qualities, because identity is a field, right? And those parameters really, really, really are one. The parameters that allows that identity to be a field and to be so one are so concise and so detailed, and you know, millions and millions of tiny little parameters and programming data sets that make us have the same experience. So really, identity, self, mind, consciousness is like a field. You know, so just for the fact that you get super close to someone and you take on their qualities and their traits. So where is the self? Where is the fundamental, you know, brick that says this is me and everything around it is not me? Like, nobody, you know, this is you and this is me. This is my brick. In the Dharma, we say that the self is just a conceptual imputation. Yeah, of course, you can say that this is this stream, this thing, this dependently generated flux is a self. And that's when you can truly identify yourself, is when you have the wisdom to recognize that field of the mind.